Hi, you guys. I'm Professor Daniel, and I just want to welcome you to your very first History 1302 lecture. So I'm going to jump right in, but before I jump in, actually, so I guess I'm not jumping right in, just a couple of housekeeping notes. So I do have dogs, so if you hear them barking, in the background, that's them. So I apologize in advance. Also, this is the office space for everyone. So if you hear something printing, don't be alarmed. Just pay attention to my voice, and you should be fine. So the first chapter that you will have in History 1302, or the first lecture, is on Reconstruction. Is actually titled. Chapter 15 is titled "What is Freedom? Reconstruction." So by this time, you should have read chapter 15 in your Give Me Liberty textbook by Eric Foner. So, with these lectures, the information comes out of the text and it comes from information that I've learned along the way. So, please make sure that you are reading your textbook. All of the information comes from the textbook, and it is imperative, it's necessary for you to read the textbook in order to ensure a passing grade in this class. So, with all of that being said, let's go ahead and get started. I will divide this chapter into a number of videos. Again, sometimes I have technical difficulties and it freezes. And in that case, I'll stop it and start right back up wherever we were. All right, but let's start. Let's dive in here to chapter 15, Reconstruction. If you've already taken 1301, you will notice that in your Give Me Liberty textbook, if you did indeed use that book, it ended in chapter 15, and the volume 2 picks right back up in chapter 15. If you don't have the textbook yet, look on your online learning platform, and they will allow you to have about 3 weeks, I think, yeah, 3 weeks of the online textbook access. So there's no excuse for reading that chapter. But let's get started. Reconstruction, or what is freedom? Reconstruction, and your chapter goes from 1865 to 1877 because that is the period that spans this era of Reconstruction. Reconstruction refers to the era right after the Civil War, where the president and the nation have this enormous task of trying to knit this nation back together after the South declared war on the United States, which resulted in 4 years of the Civil War, in which the Confederate States of America, or the South, were defeated. And so Reconstruction is this era that comes after the Civil War where the nation literally has to come back together because it has been divided into two. Two, with the end of the Civil War, and with the North winning this war that ultimately becomes about slavery, you have to decide now, what is the nation going to do with the 4 million plus formerly enslaved Black persons who live in this nation and who have labored in this nation and have literally built the nation? What do you do? Will they gain citizenship? What freedoms are they going to experience? What opportunities are they going to be able to experience? So that's another task that is really presented with the nation. How do we knit this nation together, and what are we going to do with these formerly enslaved people? So, starting off, Reconstruction is divided into two separate parts. You have presidential Reconstruction, and then you have radical Reconstruction, which comes later. Presidential Reconstruction is from the years 1865 to 1867. These are the years in which Abraham Lincoln's vice president, Andrew Johnson, who was from the South actually, and we'll get to him later on in the lecture, he is president during presidential Reconstruction. And unfortunately, we don't see a lot of gains made, especially for freedmen, during presidential Reconstruction. The second part of Reconstruction is known as Radical Reconstruction. It's during Radical Reconstruction that Johnson is impeached. He is not removed. He is nearly removed, but he is not. And then after that, we get a lot of bills and legislative actions that will provide more freedom and more rights for freedmen, including the right to vote for Black men. And so we'll start. So, for Blacks at this time, for Black people living in America, what did freedom mean? Freedom was not simply the emancipation or the abolition, rather, of slavery. Freedom was something much different. It was not just a change in status. For many Blacks living in America at this time, especially those who were former enslaved, freedom for many meant self ownership. The idea that you and your family are not owned by any person or any groups of people. It meant freedom meant family stability or the opportunity to have family stability during or under slavery, under the conditions of American slavery, enslaved people were not thought as humans at all. Unfortunately, the sad fact is that they were thought of as property. And this has been the case since, honestly, the very beginnings of American slavery. One thing that I teach my students in 1301 is that really quite soon, if you're thinking, over the course of history, but in the 17th century in Virginia, there was a law that stated that uh, slaves are to be considered property. And because they were property, they could be bought, they could be sold, they could be inherited. And it didn't matter the age of the property to the owner. There were many cases, as in a book that I read called They Were Her Property, which explores white women as slave owners in the South. Even young girls who had been passed down, enslaved people, young girls could make life or death decisions for their human property. If they didn't like how their human property behaved to them, they could be sold off. So, family stability was a very important aspect of freedom for people of color. Religious liberty, even though yes, uh, there were enslaved people had services. Yes, technically it was illegal for them to not have or to have services without a white person present. um, Freedom also meant to maybe have the ability to have some political participation through suffrage or through the vote, as well as economic autonomy. I'll be using the word autonomy a lot. If you guys have not heard of that word, autonomy means independence, economic independence. Are we going to be able to take place in this economy? And how are we going to be able to build wealth? Once slavery was abolished, many Black individuals at this time and Black communities began to do things that they weren't able to do under slavery, including holding mass meetings and having religious services without a white person present. They acquired dogs and guns and liquor, all of these things which had been prohibited to them under slavery. A lot of them would leave the plantations for better jobs or in search for family members. Family or Black institutions strengthened under emancipation, and they were expanded under emancipation. It really altered the family dynamic. Another thing that I often teach on in 1301 is how slavery really stripped. Um, I would say slavery created rather an equality of powerlessness between men and women. So while white mainstream society, in this society and in white mainstream families, women were domestics, women stayed at home and the men took care of the family. That wasn't the case. Black women were not seen as being necessarily weaker than Black men. They labored in the fields alongside Black men. Black men could not defend their women. They could not defend their wives. They could not defend their children from rape, from beatings, from mistreatment. And so under slavery, there was this really, I would say, I don't want to say weird, but there was an equality of powerlessness that slavery created because no one has power. However, after emancipation, Black men are able to take a role in the household. And so the power dynamic will shift. The power of Black men will increase. Now, Black women, even though they preferred to be able to stay home and devote more time to the family, that wasn't always a reality. And that brings me to my next point. You have the idea of freedom and the reality of freedom, right? Uh, the idea of freedom is very positive. It's very empowering. It's full of opportunities. It's bursting with opportunities. But the reality of freedom is that these individuals, these Black persons, these formerly enslaved Black persons, don't have any money because they have not been paid. There have been at this point generations of Black people who have been enslaved, but there's been no generational wealth accrued because they are thought of as property. They were the creators of wealth, but just for other people. Okay, so the idea of freedom is wonderful, but the reality of freedom is that now that you are free, you don't have any options. You don't have any land. And land is important. Land is a source of wealth. Okay. Land is very important. So they don't have any land. Just because slavery has been abolished and there's no longer a Confederate States of America, technically, it doesn't mean that people's ideas automatically changed. A lot of things will stay the same, especially during the period of presidential Reconstruction, which took place between 1865 and 1867. But we'll get to that a bit more in a little while. It's during Reconstruction that we start to see the rise of the independent Black church. Prior to Reconstruction, the AME church was created actually in the 18th century. AME stands for African Methodist Episcopal. So that was started before Reconstruction. But uh, uh, now that slavery has been abolished, we'll see the rise of the independent Black church. And churches are important. And I will say they play a vital role in the Black community because they aren't just places of worship. They will also house schools during the Reconstruction era and after. They will host social events during the Reconstruction era and after. So the church will remain or will continue to play a central role in the Black community because it's not just a place of worship. It will house schools. You will be able to have community meetings. You will be able to have political gatherings and social events, all within the church. For a lot of these people who were formerly enslaved, education was the next best thing to freedom. Okay, or the next best thing to liberty. I'll repeat that. Education was the next best thing to liberty because education was another thing that was denied to Black people under slavery. It was illegal for them to learn how to read or write. So now that they are no longer enslaved, you will see this rush to education because education also would prepare freedmen for the economic marketplace to be able to participate in politics. Okay. Now, educational freedom was key in order for these formerly enslaved individuals to be able to participate in the political arena. So the right to vote was central to former slaves' desire for empowerment as well as equality. Frederick Douglass once said that slavery is not abolished until the Black man has the ballot. I'll repeat that. Frederick Douglass said that slavery was not abolished until the Black man has the ballot. Now, why would he say this? He's saying this because until Black people can participate in creating the laws and choosing the people who will be creating these laws, you can still be put into a position of, if not outright slavery, something close to it. So it's during this period that you see this thirst for political participation, because until you are represented in government, you don't have a voice. Um, all right, so that's about 15 minutes. So, in the next section, we'll talk about land, labor, and freedom, as well as does land ever get distributed during the Reconstruction era? So, I'll see you guys in a second.